Hey guys, tonight we are headed out into a desert so wide and empty that even your GPS would probably give up and say, good luck. The Nazca Desert of southern Peru stretches like a pale brown ocean, the ground hard as stone, the sky cloudless and endless. The air is so dry your lips start to crack just by thinking about smiling, and the wind sometimes whispers across the dunes like a ghost who's been bored for centuries. Somewhere out here lies one of the strangest mysteries carved into the earth itself, the Nazca Lines. Imagine standing on the desert floor, seeing nothing but dust, rock, and heat shimmers until you get a little higher. From above, suddenly, the desert floor reveals long, straight lines cutting across miles of landscape. Shapes emerge: massive animals, spirals, triangles, and figures so huge you'd need wings to truly appreciate them. Of course, you don't have wings. You probably won't survive trying to sprout them either, so don't even think about leaping off a dune like some sort of desert Icarus. Instead, picture yourself climbing into a rattling little prop plane, stomach braced against the inevitable turbulence and peering out the window. Below you, these incredible designs stretch for hundreds of meters, crisp against the pale ground as though some cosmic artist decided to doodle on Earth's largest canvas. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're tuning in from. It makes this desert feel a little less lonely now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of this barren plateau, squinting at the horizon where the Andes loom faintly like jagged shadows. The ground beneath your shoes is coated in a reddish-brown layer of iron oxide pebbles. Kick them aside, and you'll reveal a paler layer of earth beneath. That's all it took to create these designs, scraping away the top crust to expose the lighter soil, a process so simple it almost feels like cheating. Yet the results are massive works of art spanning miles. You trace a single straight line with your eyes. It seems endless, shooting arrow-like across the desert without wobbling. How on earth did ancient people without drones, satellites, or even Google Maps manage to draw so straight? Mainstream archaeology tells you the Nazca people flourished here between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They were farmers, potters, and spiritual dreamers who lived in this harsh desert for centuries. The lines, well, they carved them as part of rituals, perhaps to call on the gods for rain. To make sense if you live in one of the driest places on Earth. Your number one hobby is probably begging the sky for a little moisture. Historians still argue whether the geoglyphs were maps to water sources, offerings to mountain deities, or ceremonial walkways. Nobody can agree. And honestly, the desert doesn't look like it cares. Here's a quirky tidbit. In 1939, an American scientist flying over the desert spotted these figures from the air and nearly spilled his coffee. Before that, people knew there were lines, but no one realized they formed giant shapes. Imagine living your whole life walking past what looks like random scratches in the dirt, only to discover they're the wings of a massive hummingbird when you finally see them from above. It's the ultimate you-had-one-job moment for ground-level explorers. The plane tilts and your stomach flips. Out the window, you see a giant hand etched into the soil, its fingers stretching like it's trying to wave at you. A few seconds later, a monkey curls its spiral tail across the desert floor. These aren't doodles you can erase with a finger in the sand. They've lasted nearly 2,000 years. And thanks to the dry desert, they'll probably outlive us too. A cheery thought for bedtime, right? Your imagination begins to spin. Did the Nazca actually think someone or something was looking down from the sky? Were these messages to gods who floated above the Andes, watching every move? Or maybe they were just the world's most extreme art students, deciding normal paper was overrated. You picture a Nazca artist holding a stick in the sand, saying, "Nah, too small. Let's try 300 feet wide." The desert night begins to fall around you now. The temperature drops quickly, and that blazing heat you felt earlier vanishes into a bone-chilling cold. You wrap your arms around yourself as the stars ignite above, sharp and countless in the ink-black sky. Out here, with almost no light pollution, the Milky Way splashes overhead like a silver river. Maybe that's what the Nazca were pointing to all along the heavens as you settled deeper into this world. The lines beneath your feet feel less like scratches and more like whispers, stretching into infinity. And you wonder, half amused and half unsettled, if someone or something might still be reading them from above. You shuffle your feet across the desert surface, imagining the sand crunching beneath leather sandals instead of sneakers. It's the year 300 CE, and the Nazca people are alive all around you. The air smells faintly of smoke from cooking fires. In distant settlements, though here in the open plateau, there's mostly silence. You picture a small group of figures moving carefully across the landscape, carrying wooden stakes, ropes, and bundles of food. Their woven tunics rustle in the breeze, and the sun beats down on their heads with no mercy. You're suddenly grateful for your modern water bottle, though you realize they probably had to walk for hours to reach a spring or well. These are the very people who created the geoglyphs that puzzle us today. They weren't aliens, not time travelers with laser beams, but ordinary humans with extraordinary patience. You imagine yourself falling into step with them, the desert dust puffing up around your ankles, listening to the thud of stakes being hammered into the soil. One person holds a rope taut between two markers, and another drags a line into the ground, scraping away the reddish top layer. Slowly, a perfectly straight groove appears. The desert is their canvas, and their method, while simple, is astonishingly precise. A mainstream historical fact: the Nazca culture was known for its ceramics, textiles, and advanced irrigation systems. They were not some mysterious, vanished tribe. We know quite a bit about their artistry. Their pottery often shows bold colors and stylized figures, condors, fish, and humans with elaborate masks. The same creatures appear on the desert floor, magnified 100 times over. Scholars suggest the Nazca may have extended their visual language from pots and cloth onto the land itself. Like a giant sketchbook, you take a step closer to one of these imagined Nazca workers. His back glistens with sweat as he carefully clears a patch of stones. His hands are calloused, his hair braided and tied back. Around his neck hangs a small amulet, maybe carved bone or a bead, a charm against the relentless desert. You want to ask him why? Why spend days or weeks scratching out a line in a place where no one can see the full picture? But his face is focused, his eyes calm. For him, this isn't art, it's devotion. Quirky tidbit: some anthropologists argue that the Nazca didn't just design these figures, they walked them. Picture processions winding along the lines like human rivers, chanting or carrying offerings. In that sense, the shapes weren't meant only to be seen from above, but to be experienced on the ground as moving rituals. Imagine tracing the spiral. Tail of the monkey with your feet, dizzy after circling around and around until you stumble. Maybe that was part of the fun nor part of the trance. Historians still argue whether the Nazca intended their geoglyphs for human eyes at all. Could it be that they were marking territory, pointing toward hidden water? Or were they communicating with gods who floated above, watching the desert like a cosmic stage? No one can prove it either way. You look at the endless lines stretching across the plateau and feel a twinge of humility. People argue over how to load the dishwasher, and here were entire communities devoting lifetimes to massive desert etchings we still can't fully decode. The sun lowers toward the Andes, painting the sky gold and crimson. shadows lengthen across the land, and suddenly the lines seem alive. From ground level, they vanish into the horizon, impossible to grasp all at once. You squint at a faint curve and realize it belongs to something bigger, an animal. Maybe, though you can't tell which. The Nazca people beside you don't need to see the whole. They know where the stakes are, where the ropes stretch, where each line belongs in the unseen design. You're struck by how much trust this requires, faith that the bigger picture exists, even when you can't see it yet. Honestly, it's not unlike trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the manual. Except they actually got it right. Night comes quickly in the desert, and the group begins to head back toward their village. You follow them, the stars blossoming overhead like flowers in reverse. The air is colder now, and you wrap your cloak tighter. Or is that just your imagination borrowing from theirs? A faint smell of roasted maize drifts on the wind, and you realize their daily lives, though harsh, had warmth too. These people weren't anonymous workers. They were families, artists, dreamers, and survivors, leaving behind a riddle scratched into the bones of the earth as you glance one last time. At the half-finished line stretching behind you, you feel a quiet connection. Someone, centuries ago, bent down right here, scraping away the pebbled surface. Their hands left a mark still visible today, defying time, storms, and indifference. And now you're standing in the same dust, wondering if maybe, just maybe, that was their intention all along, to make sure you'd never forget them. The morning sun is already harsh when you stumble back onto the plateau, eyes half squinting against the glare. The desert doesn't do soft light. It goes straight from pitch-black night to full-on spotlight. As your vision adjusts, you notice the lines again, stretching impossibly straight in every direction. But this time, you're not just tracing faint grooves in the dirt. You're beginning to see shapes take form, and suddenly it feels as if you've stepped into the sketchbook of giants. From the ground, it's tricky. A curve looks like a bump. A corner looks like nothing more than a crooked ditch. But imagine. You rise again slowly, gently lifting higher and higher until you're hundreds of feet above the desert. At that altitude, the magic snaps into place. Lines converge, edges sharpen, and what looked meaningless at your feet blossoms into creatures so huge. They seem to have been designed for someone sitting on a mountaintop in the clouds. The first figure that greets you is a hummingbird. Its beak like a sword piercing the desert, wings stretched wide as if mid-flight. It's over 300 feet long, longer than a football field, and yet somehow delicate, fragile even, etched into the earth with perfect balance. You drift along its wingspan, marveling at how every feather-like detail was placed without rulers, without drones, just wooden stakes and rope. Mainstream fact: aerial surveys have identified over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and nearly 70 animal and plant figures across this region. The hummingbird, the monkey with its spiraled tail, the massive condor, the celebrities of the desert, drawing tourists and scholars alike. But then you notice a stranger figure, a humanoid with wide eyes, arms raised as if waving, or maybe warning. Archaeologists call it the astronaut. Quirky tidbit, right? A human-like form carved centuries before spacesuits existed, standing on the slope of a hill as if declaring, "Hey, future travelers, I was here first." Some fringe thinkers go wild with this, claiming proof of ancient contact with visitors from the stars. You smirk at the idea. If aliens really did drop by, what are the odds they left behind a single doodle of themselves and said, "Good enough, beam us up"? Historians still argue whether these animal shapes served symbolic purposes. Some suggest they're connected to fertility rituals, each creature embodying traits the Nazca wanted to invoke. The hummingbird as a rainbringer, the monkey symbolizing jungle abundance, the spider hinting at water. Others believe they were Giant calendars, marking solstices and seasons through alignments you can only see from above. And then there's the most pragmatic theory of all, that they were simply offerings. Huge gifts carved into the desert for gods looking down from the heavens. You drift along the spiral tail of the monkey now, tracing it like a labyrinth, round and round, tighter and tighter, until you feel dizzy, as though the desert itself wants to pull you inward. If you imagine people walking this spiral in procession, chanting or carrying offerings, the whole thing becomes less a picture and more an experience. A moving artwork under the sun, slowly unfolding with each step. The wind picks up and sends tiny whirlwinds of dust skipping across the desert. From above, they look like miniature storms chasing across the figures. You laugh softly at the thought. 2,000 years later, and the desert itself still plays along, sketching and erasing in little fits of sand as you climb higher in your mind's eye. More figures appear, a whale stretching across the plain, a heron with a snake-like neck, a dog with alert ears, and geometric-shaped triangles, trapezoids, spirals that feel almost like arrows pointing toward nowhere. Some lines stretch for miles, so long and straight that modern surveyors marvel at their precision. It's like the Nazca were daring the future. Measure this with your fancy gadgets, we'll still be straighter. A chill slides down your spine as you realize how quiet it all is. These figures lie across nearly 200 square miles of desert. But no voices echo here. No footfalls disturb the stillness. Just the ancient marks and the whisper of wind. It's haunting in its own wail, like wandering through an art gallery, where the artists have all vanished, but the paintings remain. And yet, even in this silence, you can't help but chuckle. Imagine if the Nazca could see us now, pilots, drones, tourists with selfie sticks leaning out of planes, marveling at what they left behind. They probably didn't expect their desert doodles to end up on t-shirts and mugs in airport gift shops. That's humanity for you, turning sacred art into fridge magnets since forever. Still, you can't deny the awe, the scale, the precision. The endurance it all leaves you with the uneasy sense that you're missing something obvious. The figures weren't carved for fun. That much is certain. But what story are they telling? What message did the Nazca intend, and who exactly was the intended audience? Gods, stars, or maybe, impossibly, you. As the desert sun begins to sink again, painting the land gold, the figures seem to glow faintly against the pale ground. From this height, they're unmistakable, stretching endlessly into the horizon, each one daring you to guess their secret. And as you drift back down toward the surface, you dissolve once more into nothing but shallow grooves like whispers you can't quite catch. You kneel down in the brittle desert soil, running your fingers along one of the grooves. It's not deep, barely the width of your palm hand, yet the line cuts with unnerving clarity straight across the horizon. At first, it feels like magic. But then you tilt your head, squint, and realize the genius here isn't magic at all. It's patience, geometry, and just the right tools. The Nazca didn't have GPS satellites or laser levels tucked away in some stone workshop. What they did have were wooden stakes, bits of cord, and a stunning knack for observation. Archaeologists have recreated their methods, hammering simple posts into the ground, tying ropes between them, and dragging those ropes to carve straight grooves. Even circles and spirals can be made with nothing more than a stake and string exactly. The way you might doodle on paper by pinning one end of a thread and swinging a pencil around. Only in this case, the paper was a desert plateau stretching for miles. You stand back, impressed despite yourself. The idea of straight lines lasting for 2,000 years with nothing but simple tools feels almost comical in our era of laser pointers and high-tech construction. Mainstream fact: archaeologists working in the 20th century demonstrated that many of the Nazca lines could be reproduced in a matter of days by small teams using only what the Nazca had available. No aliens, No futuristic gadgets. Brainpower, sunlight, and blistered hands. A quirky tidbit floats into your head. Some experimental archaeologists tested this by actually making new geoglyphs in the desert. They used wooden stakes, rope, and teamwork hand, ended up producing lines so straight they could barely believe it themselves. In a sense, the Nazca had mastered desert-scale geometry long before European mathematicians put quill to parchment. Honestly, if you could time travel and hand them a protractor, they'd probably laugh and use it as a spoon. Still, historians argue whether tools alone explain the uncanny precision of the designs. Some suggest there may have been observation towers or at least hillside vantage points where the layout could be judged and corrected. Others insist the stake sand ropes theory is more than enough. The debate feels almost silly until you look. Around hundreds of lines, trapezoids, figures stretch across nearly 200 square miles. All created without being able to step back and see the whole. It's like painting a mural the size of Manhattan while standing nose to wall. The entire time. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine being part of the workforce. The desert sun burns overhead. A line of fellow workers hammers stakes into the ground, their rhythm steady and practiced. Children watch from a distance, maybe giggling, maybe running the perimeter of a spiral just for fun. A priest or shaman might stand nearby, staff in hand, directing the alignment. You can almost hear him call out, "Tighter on the rope, steadier." The result is a clean cut across the desert floor that will outlast everyone standing there. The desert itself helped. This land is basically nature's giant etching board. The dark surface pebble-stained red and brown with iron oxide dar easy to brush aside, exposing the lighter soil beneath. Once exposed, the lines stay visible, protected by the region's almost supernatural dryness. There's no rain, too. Wash them away, no thick vegetation to reclaim the space, and barely any wind strong enough to rearrange the stones. In other words, the Nazca stumbled upon the world's most reliable art medium, indestructible dirt. You tilt your head toward a trapezoid-shaped geoglyph nearby. Its sides angle inward like a runway stretching into the horizon. Fringe theorists love this one, claiming it's an ancient airport for alien ships. Sure, because when you can travel light years through space, you definitely need a dirt landing strip in Peru. Still, it's fun to imagine a UFO skidding awkwardly down one of these lines like a toddler on roller skates. The actual, less glamorous explanation. Trapezoids and long rectangles may have been ritual spaces. Picture entire communities gathering inside them, drums pounding, dancers moving in patterns, offerings laid at the center. From the ground, the space feels commanding like an outdoor temple drawn directly onto the earth. And here's something charming. Archaeologists found wooden stakes preserved in the soil, carbon dated to around the Nazca period. That means we're not guessing they really did use stakes, leaving behind the quiet fingerprints of their method. It's as if they were saying, "Relax, future people. We weren't wizards, just clever." You stand up again, brushing the dust from your knees, and the line stretches away from you so perfectly straight. It almost looks like a modern surveyor laid it down yesterday. The desert humbles you. With all your gadgets, you could barely draw a straight line on a piece of paper without checking twice. And yet here are the Nazca, 2,000 years in the past, casually marking the desert floor with the precision of a laser cutter. As the wind rustles past, you find yourself smiling. Maybe the real wonder isn't that we don't know why they did it. It's that they knew exactly how, with nothing more than persistence, teamwork, and a whole lot of desert patience. You wander away from the endless straight lines and animal figures, letting your mind drift toward the people who once walked these sands every day. The Nazca weren't some mysterious ghost race who appeared, carved giant doodles, and vanished into thin air. They lived here: families, farmers, artisans struggling to coax life out of one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. And somehow, they didn't just survive. They created one of the world's most enduring mysteries along the way. Close your eyes, and the desert transforms. Instead of barren dust, you see fields of maize and beans stretching across carefully irrigated plots. Small adobe houses cluster together, smoke rising lazily from cooking fires. Children run barefoot through the dust, chasing each other with laughter that cuts through the stillness. Women grind maize on stone slabs, their rhythmic motions steady as the desert wind. Potters spin clay vessels decorated with bright patterns. The same hummingbirds and monkeys you saw etched into the ground. The connection between their daily art and the grand desert canvas suddenly feels less mysterious, like doodles growing into masterpieces. Mainstream historical fact. The Nazca culture developed one of the earliest known systems of underground aqueducts called puquillos. These were sloping tunnels dug deep into the earth to tap underground water, lined with stone and connected by spiral access holes. They allowed the Nazca to irrigate fields even in this dry wasteland. Without the puquillos, their civilization might have been just another cautionary tale of don't build cities where it never rains. Instead, they thrived here for centuries. A quirky tidbit floats into the scene. The spiral access holes, too. These aqueducts look a little like the spirals carved into the desert floor. Some archaeologists wonder if the same symbolic language of water and spirals extended from their engineering to their art. Imagine a Nazca farmer, sweaty from a day, digging into the earth, looking at a spiral well and thinking that would look great, but enormous. Next thing you know, there's a 300-foot spiral tail of a monkey in the desert. Historians still argue whether daily survival and spiritual practice were two sides of the same coin for the Nazca. Did they build lines to beg for rain because they knew, deep down, how fragile their hold on the desert was? Or were the lines just one more layer of a culture already obsessed with symbols and art, decorating everything from pots to landscapes? There's no clear answer, only the quiet evidence left in both dirt and clay. You stroll into a Nazca village. In your mind, greeted by the earthy smell of maize beer chicha. People gather under simple shelters made of woven reeds, sipping from clay vessels. There's laughter, music, perhaps the soft thrum of panpipes carried by the wind. Life here is communal, close-knit, every resource shared because the desert demands it. You realize suddenly that the geoglyphs weren't created by solitary artists brooding in the wilderness. They were the work of entire communities. Teams of families, neighbors, perhaps even villages. Coming together with shared purpose, a child tugs at your sleeve, showing off a painted pot with a figure of a killer whale. You laugh, remembering the killer whale geoglyph that stretches across the plateau. On the pot, the creature looks fierce, its mouth gaping. On the desert floor, it's monumental. It's as if the Nazca had one big artistic language, scaled up or down depending on the canvas. The desert heat presses against you, again reminding you of how hard it must have been to live here. Water was scarce, the sun merciless, and yet the Nazca found beauty in the struggle. They turned their environment into both necessity and art, digging underground rivers to survive, and etching giant creatures into the desert to connect with forces greater than themselves. You take a deep breath, the scent of earth and smoke filling your lungs, and feel a kind of respect. These weren't just the mysterious builders of lines, they were parents tucking children into woven blankets at night, farmers checking fields at dawn, potters humming as they shaped clay. Their lives weren't defined only by the geoglyphs. But those geoglyphs remain the loudest whisper they left behind. You glance back toward the plateau as the sun dips lower. In the distance, the lines wet, silent, patient, enduring. And somehow, knowing the daily life of the people who made them makes the mystery even richer. It's not just how or why anymore, it's who. And suddenly, the ghostly figures of farmers, artisans, and children seem to walk beside you, their footsteps still echoing across the desert floor. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the air seems to dry your skin from the inside out. Every step you take stirs a tiny puff of dust, and your tongue feels thick, heavy, as though the desert itself is trying to claim it. You begin to understand why the Nazca spent so much energy not just making art, but fighting for water. In this place, thirst isn't a passing inconvenience, it's the daily boss battle of life. You kneel down near one of the spiral-shaped holes in the ground. At first, it looks like some odd desert whirlpool that's been frozen mid-spin. But then you lean over and realize you're staring into the opening of one of those famous quirks, the underground aqueducts that carried precious water from hidden sources beneath the earth. The spirals weren't just decorative. They acted like natural funnels, guiding wind down into the tunnels to help keep the water moving and accessible. Clever, right? It's like ancient desert air conditioning, but for water. Mainstream historical fact: many of these quirks are still functional today. Farmers in the Nazca region still rely on them, proof that the system wasn't just ritual or symbolic, it was engineering at its finest. You imagine Nazca workers digging through the brittle soil with stone tools, shoring up walls with timber and rocks, and somehow managing to reach groundwater. Not bad for a civilization often underestimated as just desert dwellers. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The spiral shapes of the quirks are visible even from above, making them resemble the spiral tails and motifs carved into the desert floor. Some researchers think the connection wasn't accidental. Perhaps the Nazca had a spiral obsession, seeing in that shape the very key to survival. Water, life, fertility, all wound together in the eternal coil of a spiral. You can almost picture a Nazca farmer sighing as he climbs down the spiral to fetch water, muttering, "Great, more stairs," while unknowingly leaving behind one of the most fascinating archaeological Easter eggs of all time. Historians still argue whether the Nazca's obsession with water influenced the lines directly. Were the geoglyphs prayers carved into the earth, begging the gods for rain? Or were they symbols of gratitude, marking the sacred act of surviving another year in a place that really doesn't want you around? There's no definitive answer. But as you glance across the shimmering plain, the thought of desperate hope etched into the dirt feels strangely believable. You walk now through what was once farmland, though to your eyes it looks barren. But close your imagination, and suddenly, maize stalks rise around you, beans climb wooden stakes, and gourds hang heavy on vines. The irrigation channels snake between rows, bringing water from the quirks to each thirsty plant. Farmers crouch low, tending the fields with quiet concentration. Without this network of underground veins, the Nazca civilization would have shriveled up like a raisin in the sun. Instead, they flourished. A breeze kicks dust into your face, reminding you of how fragile all of this really was. One misstep in water management, one season of failed rain, and everything could collapse. Maybe that's why their spirituality and survival were intertwined. The gods weren't just abstract deities, they were rain clouds, rivers, and mountain spirits holding the keys to existence. You pause at the edge of a spiral quirk, leaning over to watch the shadow of your face ripple against the cool water below. The contrast is stark. Above ground, lifeless dryness. Below, a hidden stream of salvation. It feels symbolic of the Nazca themselves, outwardly austere, yet inwardly resourceful and alive. It's easy to joke about aliens and landing strips. But the truth is, the real miracle of the Nazca might not be the lines at all. It might be their stubborn genius in keeping themselves alive out here. Still, you can't help but smirk. If some modern influencer had lived here, they'd definitely be posting, "Just digging my quirk. No big deal. Hashtag desert life hashtag thirst trap. Double quotes. As the afternoon deepens, you imagine the Nazca people gathering near. One of the larger puquios, perhaps turning it into more than a utility. A place of water is also a place of ritual. Offerings could have been dropped into the spiral, prayers whispered into the echoing tunnel. Every sip of water carried a weight of gratitude. Every harvest proof that their system worked and that their gods, however mysterious, were listening. The desert wind cools as the sun begins its downward path again. You wipe a layer of dust from your face, thirsty but oddly comforted. The Nazca had thirst too, but they answered it with ingenuity, carving survival itself into the ground. And just like the lines on the plateau, their spirals and channels remain a quiet reminder. That resilience can be as enduring as mystery. You trudge farther across the plateau, the desert stretching so wide it feels like the earth itself forgot where to end. The lines are all around you now, weaving across the barren floor, silent and steady. You can't help but wonder if they were meant for eyes like yours or if the intended audience was something far higher. Floating in the heavens, the Nazca didn't just draw shapes. Many of the lines are arrow straight for miles, some converging toward the horizon as if pointing at invisible targets in the sky. Stand in the middle of one, and it feels less like a drawing and more like a path, an invitation to follow, or maybe a demand. You walk along one of these endless tracks, your footsteps crunching against stone. There's a trance-like rhythm to it. Step after step, the line pulls you forward like a string stretched taut between earth and sky. Mainstream fact: archaeologists widely believe the lines had a ritual function, possibly tied to water or fertility ceremonies. Some scholars think the lines acted as sacred pathways where processions marched in deliberate patterns, offerings in hand. The sheer scale suggests these weren't meant for casual strolls, they were avenues of devotion. Imagine a priest leading worshippers under the beating sun, their chants rising into the empty sky. Their footsteps literally carving prayer into the desert. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some lines end in little piles of stones, called cairns, almost like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. Were they shrines, markers, or places to leave offerings? Maybe all three. It's a strangely human touch, start after miles of endless straightness. Someone just had to add a little full stop at the end. Historians still argue whether these pathways were meant for human feet alone, or whether they were messages directed upward. Some researchers argue that the sheer size makes sense only if you assume that gods or cosmic beings were meant to look down and read them. Others shrug and say the Nazca weren't aiming for visibility, but experience. Walking the lines might have been the point, not seeing them. Either way, the desert holds its tongue, giving you nothing but the crunch of your shoes and the whisper of wind. You pause, catching your breath. The horizon glows with heat, blurring the distance like a mirage. For a moment, you imagine what it would be like to truly believe that every step you take on these lines is a prayer shooting skyward. That somewhere above, a god is watching, waiting for proof of your devotion. Suddenly, your walk feels heavier. Each step has meaning, weight, echo. Nearby, another line runs parallel to yours, then intersects at a sharp angle. The desert becomes a giant graph, a cosmic blueprint too large for one pair of eyes. From above, it must look intentional, precise. From here, it just feels overwhelming, like being an ant trapped in a maze drawn by giants. You glance up at the empty sky, wondering if the gods ever answered, if rain clouds ever gathered in response, or if the desert always kept its cruel silence. The thought makes you chuckle. Imagine carving 100 miles of lines into the earth, hoping for rain, and the sky just goes, nah. That's devotion on another level, equal parts faith and stubbornness. And maybe that's the real lesson here. You keep walking, the desert blazing all around. The lines like quiet sermons baked into the ground as the light begins to fade. The lines seem to glow faintly, their pale soil catching the last rays of the sun. From here, they look like roads to nowhere. But from the sky or from some unseen vantage, they might be prayers written in a language you'll never decode. You stop in the center of an intersection, heart pounding, and look around. Every direction is open. Every line leads outward into distance and mystery. For the Nazca, maybe that was the point. To walk was to pray, to trace these invisible connections between earth and heaven. And though you're just a weary traveler stumbling along, centuries later, you feel the echo of that devotion tugging at your steps. The desert feels quieter tonight, almost like it's holding its breath. You step carefully over gravel and hardened soil until the shapes around you begin to shift. At first, it's just lined straight, stern, determined. But then, the desert opens up, and suddenly you're standing in the middle of something grander. The straight paths curl and bend into sweeping arcs, loops, and spirals. The Nazca weren't content with roads to nowhere. They drew living things into the land itself. You catch the outline of a hummingbird, its wings stretched impossibly wide, carved into the desert floor with delicate precision. You tilt your head, tracing the long beak that seems to pierce the horizon. Why a hummingbird? To the Nazca, hummingbirds symbolized life, fertility, and maybe even rain. After all, these little birds appear only when flowers bloom in water. That most precious gift in the desert is near. Imagine how miraculous it must have felt, seeing one dart through the dry air, shimmering like living light. A few steps later, another creature looms into view, a monkey, its spiraled tail curling so perfectly you could swear it's a giant fingerprint pressed into the earth. Monkeys don't live here. Of course, this is desert, not rainforest. But the Nazca traded with distant regions, and stories of monkeys must have traveled with the goods. Some scholars say the monkey geoglyph reflects connections with the Amazon, a reminder that the Nazca weren't isolated but part of a larger web of cultures. And then there's the spider-long legs stretched across the sand, elegant and eerie at once. Archaeologists discovered that this spider isn't just any random doodle. It's a species with a microscopic feature on its leg only visible under magnification. That raises a bizarre question. How did the Nazca notice it? Mainstream historians suggest it was pure observation, the kind you get when you live close to nature and study its every quirk. Fringe theorists, though, whisper about lost technology, ancient magnifying tools, or even help from beings not of this earth. Historians still argue whether these animal forms were simply symbolic art, or whether they carried specific ritual purposes. Some point out that many creatures are tied to fertility, water, and survival, exactly what a desert people would pray for. Others claim they might have served as enormous calendars, with animal figures marking different seasonal events. Matter the interpretation, one thing is clear. These animals weren't just idle sketches. They were carved prayers, permanent murals dedicated to forces greater than the human hand. You imagine the ceremony: priests walking along the spider's leg, worshippers circling the hummingbird's wings, their footsteps activating symbols too massive to appreciate from the ground. From their perspective, it wasn't about seeing the whole figure. It was about becoming part of it. Walking the lines wasn't separate from the drawing, it was the drawing. You step into the monkey's spiral tail, and as you turn in circles, dizzy with heat and motion, you almost feel like you're spiraling into another realm. There's a quirky tidbit here that makes you smirk. The monkey's tail, that perfect spiral, is drawn counterclockwise. In many ancient cultures, direction mattered. Spirals could symbolize the sun's path, life cycles, or even portals. Was the Nazca monkey pointing to cosmic order? Or was it just a design choice, ancient graffiti with flair? Either way, standing in the middle of it makes you feel like you've stumbled into the Nazca's private, inside joke. One written at the scale of mountains, and think about this for a second. No planes, no drones, no hot air balloons. Yet somehow, the Nazca knew these shapes worked. How? Maybe by drawing small versions first, then scaling them up with ropes and grids. Maybe they climbed nearby hills for a partial glimpse. Or maybe they trusted the gods to see what they couldn't. After all, what's the point of carving a giant hummingbird if the gods already know it's there? The stars begin to prick the sky now, faint at first, then brighter. You lie down in the center of the spider, staring upward as though the constellation of your body could join the constellation. Above, a thought lingers. Perhaps the Nazca wanted to bring the creatures of Earth into conversation with the heavens. Birds, monkeys, spiders, living beings etched into the desert, gazing skyward forever. You close your eyes and picture gods looking down, nodding, as if to say, "Message received." Still, you chuckle to yourself. If aliens really did fly over, imagine them squinting at a desert-sized monkey tail. What is this directions to a cosmic zoo? You mutter under your breath. It's the kind of thought that makes you giggle in the dark, even as the desert keeps its solemn silence. The animals remain. Their meaning may have shifted, argued, stretched across centuries, but they persist. And tonight, under the stars, you find yourself oddly grateful for their company. A hummingbird for hope, a monkey for mystery, a spider for secrets. The desert feels less empty with them etched into its skin. The night deepens, but the desert doesn't rest. Instead, it begins to hum in your imagination, as if the ground beneath you wants to speak. You brush the dust from your clothes and wander back onto one of the immense straight lines. This one stretches so far that it feels like an arrow aimed at infinity. And your mind can't help but chase where it points. Upward, the Nazca lived in a world where the heavens mattered. Stars weren't just dots, they were timekeepers, storytellers, divine messengers. You picture yourself as a Nazca observer, lying flat on a woven mat, staring at the Milky Way, arching like a river across the black sky. Maybe the hummingbird etched below isn't only a hummingbird, it's an earthly echo of a celestial bird. Some scholars believe the Nazca Lines may align with star patterns. Acting as a giant observatory, you could walk inside. You pause and squint at the horizon. Historians still argue whether some lines and shapes match solstices or constellations. The straight ones, in particular, seem suspiciously deliberate. Some align with the rising or setting of the sun during key agricultural seasons. A line isn't just a line, could be a giant arrow pointing to when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for survival. You sigh, realizing the desert might have been their calendar, their clock, and their compass all at once. But then, your mind wanders to fringe theories, and you can't help smiling at their audacity. One of the wildest suggests that the geoglyphs were runways for alien ships. Runways out here, where no plane will land for centuries. You imagine little green beings complaining about turbulence while their cosmic GPS reroutes them to the spider glyph. Sorry, Dave, we missed the monkey tail exit. It's ridiculous, yes, but also fun to picture under the silent, star-laden sky. There's also the idea that the Milky Way itself held meaning for the Nazca. To some ancient South American cultures, it wasn't just a band of stars, it was a celestial river, a reflection of earthly water. In a desert where water meant life, connecting sky rivers with earth lines must have felt natural. The lines may have been invitations, bridges between worlds, or rituals to make heaven's river bless the barren sands below. You shift your gaze skyward again. A bright constellation glitters, the Southern Cross, sharp and sure. Imagine the Nazca tracing such shapes with sticks in the dirt. then carrying them onto the plateau at a scale only the gods could fully appreciate. You chuckle softly. It's almost like they invented street art, only their streets were star maps, and their gallery stretched across 500 square kilometers. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some researchers once floated the theory that the Nazca could have built hot air balloons from woven fabric and gourds, giving them a bird's-eye view of their creations. No hard proof exists, but the idea tickles your imagination. Picture it: Nazca families piling into a homemade balloon, the desert shrinking below them, lines and animals snapping into focus. The first ever drone footage, minus the drone. You smirk. It's a theory that may never fly, but it sure lifts the mood as you keep walking. The line you follow dips slightly, pointing toward the place where the sun will rise tomorrow. You try to feel it the way the Nazca might have, a quiet reassurance that dawn is inevitable, that even in the harshest desert, the sun will always return. These lines may have been reminders, prayers written large enough for the sky itself to notice. Historians still debate whether the Nazca's true audience was the gods, the people, or the cosmos itself. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Maybe the beauty lies in the ambiguity, the fact that each theory leaves enough mystery to keep the desert alive in your mind. The lines don't just exist. They provoke, they invite, they dare you to wonder. You find yourself laughing softly again, imagining a Nazca priest wagging a finger at you. Stop overthinking. Just walk the line. That's what you do. The sand crunches underfoot, your steps slow and steady, and for a moment it feels like you're part of their ritual. Not to prove an academic theory, not to crack a code, just to walk. To connect earth and sky with your own body moving through the space in between. The stars shimmer harder, and a shooting star streaks across the horizon like a cosmic exclamation point. You grin, knowing the Nazca would have seen the same thing centuries ago. Maybe they gasped, maybe they prayed, maybe they laughed at the coincidence. You do all three at once, caught between awe, mystery, and the desert's quiet humor. And there it is, the strange, comforting truth. Whether the lines point to constellations, solstices, or spaceship landing pads, they are bridges. Bridges between people and sky, past and present, science and speculation. As you finally sit, tired but oddly soothed, the desert sky seems to lean closer, as if whispering back, "Keep wondering." The desert is never silent for long, at least not in your imagination. As you sit there beneath the southern hemisphere's constellations, a thought keeps tugging. What if the lines weren't just for the gods above, but for the people themselves? After all, you can't spend centuries carving hundreds of miles of grooves in the sand without weaving those shapes into your culture. You brush a hand along the shallow trench at your side. Feels like a road, and maybe that's what it was. A pathway, not for wagons or llamas, but for feet moving in rhythm. Archaeologists have found evidence of foot-worn patterns along some geoglyphs, as though entire groups marched along the lines during ceremonies. You imagine a procession of Nazca families chanting softly, carrying offerings, the desert echoing with footsteps. The lines weren't to be seen from above. They were to be walked, danced, lived upon. Historians still argue whether the shapes acted as ritual stages. One theory suggests the monkey, the spider, the hummingbird, they were all part of a sacred choreography. To walk the lines was to participate in a cosmic performance. You try it, tracing a few feet of a curve with your steps, arms out like a balancing act. For a moment, you feel like you're in their shoes, literally spinning through geometry in the name of faith. But the practical side of you interrupts. What about farming? The Nazca weren't priests alone. They were farmers first. They relied on maize, beans, and gourds coaxed from the desert with canals and wells. Quirky as it sounds, some scholars think the lines doubled as water maps, guiding people toward hidden aquifers or marking ritual points for praying to the water gods. You grin at the idea of desert farmers drawing giant arrows in the sand just to remind themselves, water's that way, folks. You remember a mainstream fact. The Nazca built underground aqueducts called puquios, spiraling funnels that captured and preserved water. Some still work today. Now imagine pairing that engineering with the geoglyphs above spiritual highways, running across the desert anchored by the lifeblood of underground water. A civilization both mystical and deeply practical. You can't help but respect the multitasking. And here comes the fringe theory to spice it up. Some writers insist the geoglyphs are messages not to gods or people, but to visitors from the stars. Drink here, land there. Please don't vaporize us. It's an entertaining notion, though you laugh at the absurdity. If aliens really needed road signs, maybe they weren't as advanced as Hollywood thinks. You picture an alien ship circling aimlessly, one pilot muttering, "Great Zorblock. We missed the hummingbird exit again." Still, whether meant for gods, neighbors, or interstellar tourists, the lines undeniably carried meaning. You can sense it as you imagine the desert filled with Nazca voices. The ceremonies might have been loud and lively, or solemn and hushed. Either way, participation mattered. These weren't monuments to stare at, they were spaces to inhabit. Walking further, your sandals crunch along another straight line, and you notice how it narrows in the distance. From ground level, it pulls you forward, like a visual trick leading your eyes into the horizon. It's almost meditative. You catch yourself breathing slower, matching the rhythm of your steps. Maybe that's part of the point, a giant mindfulness exercise. Centuries before anyone coined the term, historians still debate whether the shapes were intended to be permanent messages or temporary stages. In a land with so much wind and shifting sand, you might expect the lines to vanish quickly. Yet because of the desert's dryness and lack of rain, they remain. The Nazca couldn't have known they'd last this long. Perhaps they made them. For one night, one ritual, one prayrand, yet here you are, millennia later, wandering their fated stage. A quirky fact slips in. Some of the lines intersect so cleverly that they create optical illusions from certain angles. Walk along one, and another suddenly appears to line up with a mountain peak, as though by magic. It's the Nazca version of a TikTok transition ancient, but surprisingly smooth. You pause at a crossing point, where two lines slice across each other. You imagine a gathering here, people meeting, exchanging goods, sharing stories, gossiping. The geoglyphs weren't only sacred, they might have been communal spaces. A desert town square without walls or roofs. A place where faith and everyday life intertwined like the lines themselves. The desert wind kicks up dust, and you close your eyes against it. When you open them, the lines are still there, stubborn and steady. You can almost hear a Nazca elder's voice reminding you, these lines are more than drawings. They're conversations carved into the earth. Conversations you're only half overhearing. Your feet ache, your throat feels dry, but your spirit hums. You realize you've been walking not just through a landscape, but through layers of meaning, ritual, farming, water, stars, community, mystery. The Nazca didn't separate these things. For them, every act of survival was spiritual, and every ritual was practical. The lines prove it, sprawling endlessly, waiting for you to walk them again tomorrow. The desert night deepens, but your thoughts keep stretching as wide as the geoglyphs beneath your feet. You tilt your head back to the stars again, and suddenly the geometry at your feet starts to feel less like random art and more like a mirror. Could the lines be maps of the sky itself? The idea isn't new. Archaeoastronomy fans have been whispering about it for decades. You picture a Nazca priest, standing exactly where you are, pointing upward. The straight line beside you aligns with the rising of a bright star on the horizon, perhaps Sirius or Aldebaran. Some lines do, in fact, seem to point toward solstice sunrises or lunar standstills. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or just cosmic coincidence, but you can't help feeling the chill of possibility. It's like holding a giant protractor against the heavens. One mainstream fact anchors the thought. Many ancient civilizations, from Stonehenge in Britain to the pyramids in Egypt, built monuments aligned with celestial events. The Nazca, too, might have woven astronomy into their sacred sand drawings. Agriculture demanded it knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when rains might come. Out here, without iPhones or weather apps, the sky was the ultimate calendar. A quirky tidbit sneaks in. A few researchers argue that certain animal figures represent constellations. The hummingbird could match Orion's belt. The monkey, a swirling galaxy. Imagine Nazca kids lying in the sand, tracing the same shapes in the sky that their parents etched on the ground. It's cosmic connected dots, scaled up to desert size. And, of course, the fringe theory crowd runs with it. The lines, they say, aren't just sky maps, they're runways for alien aircraft. Landing strips carved for extraterrestrial visitors who navigate by the stars. You sigh, half amused, half intrigued. If aliens did need runway lights, the Nazca Desert would have made for a budget-friendly airport. No landing fees, plenty of space, and zero TSA lines. Still, you roll your eyes, no scorch marks, no UFO. Wreckage, just good old human stubbornness and ingenuity. You crouch lower, letting your fingers sift through the pebbles. The surface feels like ordinary Earth, yet arranged in extraordinary patterns. You think about how much planning it would take to align a massive line with the sun or a star. The Nazca didn't have drones or satellites. They used ropes, stakes, and a sharp eye. And somehow, it worked. The alignment theory isn't that far-fetched. Human patience can be just as powerful as rocket science. Walking along another line, you notice it runs arrow straight toward a jagged mountain in the distance. Some scholars suggest the mountains themselves acted as horizon markers, natural guides that framed celestial events. It makes sense nature was both the canvas and the ruler. You grin at the thought. The Nazca Desert was one big astronomy classroom, where the chalkboard stretched for miles. Yet historians still debate whether every alignment was intentional. With hundreds of lines going in dozens of directions, some connections might just be chance. After all, if you draw enough lines, some will naturally point to something meaningful. That doesn't stop your imagination, though. You picture a Nazca. Priest arms raised at dawn, chanting as the first rays of sunlight glide perfectly along a geoglyph. Ritual and science, faith and farming, all woven into one shining moment. A playful thought interrupts. What if the Nazca weren't charting the heavens, but gossip? This line points to the sunrise, but also to Javier's llama pen coincidence. I think not. You laugh quietly at your own joke, the sound small against the vast silence. Humor, after all, keeps the desert from feeling too heavy. The wind carries a chill now, and you wrap your arms around yourself. The stars shimmer harder, crisp and sharp. The geoglyphs below blur into the darkness, yet your mind keeps sketching them anyway, connecting sand to sky. You feel caught between two maps, one etched in earth, the other inked in stars. Another quirky note, some lines end abruptly at hills, as if meant to be extended by imagination alone. Stand at the base of such a line, and your gaze naturally leaps upward, pulled toward the heavens. The Nazca may have designed them this way deliberately, blending physical lines with imagined trajectories. It's a subtle trick, the kind that makes you whisper, "Oh, I see what you did there." The thought settles heavy and sweet. Maybe the geoglyphs weren't meant to last forever or to be solved like puzzles. Maybe they were meant to be experienced, to pull people's eyes up from their everyday chores, reminding them of their place in the grand cosmic swirl. You feel yourself doing the same, neck craned, spine aching, but soul a little lighter. You lie back on the sand, staring upward, and the horizon line melts into sky. For a heartbeat, you can't tell where Earth ends and stars begin. The Nazca Lines feel like threads sewing those two realms together, and you, right now, are stitched into the seam. The sand still clings to your clothes as you push yourself upright, brushing it away, though it never really goes. Out here, the desert owns you more than you own it. You start walking again, following another faint path that cuts across the plain, but this one feels different. It doesn't go toward the horizon or mimic a constellation. Instead, it heads straight for the mountains, vanishing into their shadows. Water, that thought creeps in like a whisper. Maybe the Nazca weren't just gazing at stars or making desert art, they were thirsty. Living in one of the driest places on Earth means you think about water constantly, even more than coffee on a Monday morning. The lines, some researchers argue, could have been giant arrows pointing to hidden aquifers, rivers underground, or sacred springs tucked into the mountains. It makes sense. Here's the mainstream fact. The Nazca built puquios, an advanced system of underground aqueducts that still function today. Spiral-shaped holes lead down into tunnels, guiding fresh water to fields. Without them, the Nazca couldn't have survived. So maybe the geoglyphs weren't just pretty designs, they were signposts in a landscape, where water was life. You pause at the foot of one such spiral depression, its corkscrew entrance curling into the earth like a seashell. Imagine Nazca engineers dropping into the shadows, carving tunnels by hand, stone tools tapping away for weeks or months. You lean over the edge, half expecting to hear water gurgling below. Instead, silence rises back, broken only by the dry whistle of wind. But here comes the quirky tidbit. Some locals believe the lines weren't just functional, they were offerings. Draw a massive bird or monkey in the desert, and maybe the gods will notice your effort. Maybe they'll be so impressed they'll send rain. It's the ultimate celestial bribe, art in exchange for survival. Forget coins in a fountain, these were whole deserts scratched into devotion. Historians still argue whether the lines truly connected to water, or whether that's a modern stretch. After all, not every line ends at a puquio. Some zigzag across barren zones with no aquifers in sight, but as you stand there, you can't help but feel the connection. When every drop matters. You'd want the gods to see you working hard, painting prayers so big they can't be ignored. You start pacing along another trapezoid, wide at one end, narrowing at the other like a funnel. Your shoes crunch the gravel, each step a hollow echo. The shape pulls you forward, and you can almost imagine streams of invisible water flowing with you. Maybe that was the point. Walking these lines wasn't just ritual, it was rehearsal. A performance for the rain that never came. A half smile creeps over your face as you think of it. The Nazca hosting the world's longest rain dance, except instead of stomping in circles, they drew highways in the desert. If nothing else, it shows persistence. You've wished for pizza delivery more desperately than the Nazca prayed for rain. But at least your odds were better. Still, the seriousness weighs back in. You picture cracked lips, parched fields, mothers carrying water jars heavier than they. Where the desert wasn't just a backdrop, was the daily battle. The geoglyphs might have been less about mystery and more about begging the earth for mercy. And then comes the goosebump thought. What if the lines weren't for humans at all? What if they were drawn for the gods to see from above? Huge arrows, symbols, animals each, one guiding divine eyes toward the puquios, saying, "Here, bless this spot." You tilt your head up again, imagining a god's view. The desert stretched flat, the lines glowing faintly under moonlight, pointing out every precious drop. It's less about us looking up and more about something greater looking down. Yet your skeptical side pipes up. If the lines were just about water, why make a giant monkey? Unless the monkey was secretly a rain mascot doing a cosmic jig for storm clouds. You chuckle at the thought somewhere in another dimension. A god claps slowly, entertained but unmoved. The path you're on veers into the foothills. And soon the desert floor gives way to rock. Here, smaller glyphs appear, less famous than the hummingbird or spider, but just as intentional. Zigzagging shapes resemble streams. Spirals mimic whirlpools. These designs don't scream art gallery, they whisper geology lesson. They might have been desert infographics before PowerPoint was cool. And here comes another debate. Some scholars argue the Nazca Lines functioned as maps of underground water sources, while others say the connection is too patchy. There isn't enough evidence to prove it either way. You grin at the iron academics in air-conditioned offices arguing about water maps while you're out here sweating just thinking about it. You crouch, scoop a handful of dust, and let it trickle through your fingers. Each grain is a reminder. Survival was everything. The Nazca didn't draw lines for fun. They carved lifelines. You glance back over the desert, and suddenly every geoglyph feels like a prayer folded into the earth. A gentle breeze picks up, cool but dry, brushing against your face. You take it in like a sip of water, and for a moment, you think you can feel the Nazca too, waiting with you. Eyes on the empty horizon, hoping the sky would one day answer. Your legs ache a little as you climb higher into the foothills, the desert plain stretching out behind you like a giant canvas. From this new vantage point, the lines shift again, like a magic eye puzzle where the trick only works if you stand just right. One path you thought was random suddenly reveals itself as part of a rectangle. Another line aligns with a distant ridge. It's as if the desert keeps whispering secrets, but only if you're patient enough to listen. And now your mind drifts toward ceremony. Imagine the Nazca not as anonymous desert engineers, but as performers. Vast open-air rituals, hundreds of people walking those straight lines, circling trapezoids, following the curves of a monkey's tail. To you, it feels almost like choreography on a stage that's 40 miles wide. Here's the mainstream fact. Pottery and textiles from the Nazca culture often depict the same animals you see etched into the desert. Hummingbirds, monkeys, jaguars, they weren't random doodles. These creatures carried symbolic weight, appearing in myths, ceremonies, and even daily tools. By carving them into the earth, the Nazca might have been bringing their stories to life, making the desert itself part of the performance. The quirky tidbit. Some anthropologists suggest that these rituals might have involved hallucinogenic plants, like the San Pedro cactus, which the Nazca definitely knew about. Picture it. Desert night, a fire crackling at the edge of a geoglyph. The stars overhead, brighter than any city light show, and a community of people seeing the lines glow, shift, and pulse with meaning. It's Burning Man, minus the DJs and glow sticks. Historians still argue whether the geoglyphs were strictly ceremonial or if they had more practical uses, like calendars or maps. Maybe they were both. A ritual can guide you spiritually while still pointing toward the next harvest or the next water source. Humans are good at multitasking. After all, you picture yourself in the middle of a massive trapezoid, the crowd around you moving in unison. Drums thump, flutes whine. The dry ground shakes beneath feet. Each step becomes an offering, a plea, a performance for both the gods and the community. It's not just walking, it's theater. And you, by being here in this story, are part of the cast. You glance down at your shoes and laugh softly. Imagine the Nazca seeing your sneakers' bright synthetic rubber with cushioned soles. They'd probably think you were underprepared, not overprepared. Out here, barefoot might have been the truer connection. Every toe gripping the earth, every step a reminder of fragility. But then the thought gets heavier. Walking the lines wasn't just ceremony, it might have been survival theater. By repeating the patterns of animals or spirals, the Nazca may have believed they were inviting cosmic forces into the desert, coaxing rain, fertility, or protection. Picture hundreds of people walking the hummingbird's long beak over and over, as if feeding it life through their devotion. You squint at the horizon. Heat shimmers distort the air, turning the desert into a mirage-filled stage. Was the ceremony about connecting earth and sky, or about bridging illusion and reality? Out here, the line between the two is thin. You could almost believe a jaguar is waiting just beyond the dunes, ready to leap from sand to myth. The idea of walking as prayer resonates. No words, no temples, just footsteps carving temporary rhythm into permanent stone. It's oddly modern tool-like meditation apps telling you to breathe, walk, and be present. Except the Nazca didn't need apps. They had a whole desert to meditate. Then another whimsical thought sneaks in. What if the rituals included snacks? Imagine people handing around roasted maize or sweet potatoes after hours of desert walking. It's the ancient version of a marathon's water station. But instead of "you've got this," it's "the gods are watching. Keep going." Historians still argue whether all members of society joined these rituals or if only elites and priests participated. Did children run, giggling through the lines while elders scolded them? Or was it solemn, every movement rehearsed and sacred? No one knows for sure. And maybe that's the beauty. You can project your own imagination onto the blank stage. You. Close your eyes for a second and listen. The wind whistles, your breathing slows, and in your mind's ear, you can almost hear drums. A heartbeat of a vanished culture, steady and soft, rising from the desert floor. As you open your eyes, the sun dips lower, painting the desert gold. Shadows lengthen, stretching across the geoglyphs like curtains falling on a stage. The ceremony is over, but the echo remains, carried by the sand, waiting for the next group of dreamers to step into the spotlight. The desert cools as evening settles in, and you find yourself walking slower, savoring the long shadows draped across the ground. The lines themselves seem to glow in the dimming light, almost like they're phosphorescent veins running through the earth. This is when the desert stops being just hot dust and starts feeling like a cosmic mirror, reflecting the night sky back at you. Your thoughts drift upward, where the first stars begin to twinkle. It's impossible not to connect them with the geoglyphs beneath your feet. After all, here's the mainstream fact. Many archaeologists have noted the Nazca's fascination with astronomy. Their pottery and textiles often depict celestial imageries, nuns, and constellations woven into everyday art. The desert sky was their planetarium. A free nightly show. Then comes the fringe tidbit, and it's a fun one. A few researchers, leaning into the messages to the sky idea, suggest the Nazca Lines were essentially giant star maps, aligning certain figures with constellations. The monkey might echo the Pleiades, or the hummingbird might align with the December solstice. Sunrise. Was the desert floor a second sky? A flipped chart for the gods above? It's tantalizing to think of the Nazca standing in a trapezoid, pointing upward and saying, "See? It matches." But historians still argue whether these alignments are intentional or just happy coincidences. After all, when you've got hundreds of lines crisscrossing 500 square kilometers, some of them are bound to match a star or two. It's the same reason people find shapes in clouds or see celebrity faces in toast. Humans are pattern machines, and sometimes we overclock. Still, you tilt your head back and let the thought play. Imagine lying flat in the desert, staring at the Milky Way, the cool sand beneath you, the endless glitter above you, and right between them, the lines teen Earth to heaven. If the gods wanted proof of devotion, the Nazca could literally point to it and say, "Look what we've built." For you, you snicker at the absurdity of modern comparisons. It's basically the Nazca equivalent of sending a massive text message into the cosmos. Except instead of typing, "Hey, you up," into your phone, they carved a 100-meter-long hummingbird into the ground and hoped the sky gods noticed. But then you feel a kind of awe creep in. Maybe they weren't just asking questions of the sky. They were embedding themselves into it. Every straight line a reminder that humans can order chaos. Every animal a bridge between myth, Earth, and the glittering unknown. You wonder what it would feel like to believe, without irony, that your community's rituals shaped the stars themselves. The air cools fast now. You pull your jacket tighter and keep walking along a faint ridge. A sudden breeze sends sand skittering over the surface, momentarily erasing parts of the lines. And just like that, you're struck by how fragile they are. One strong storm, and the figures could vanish forever. It's almost comical that the only reason they've survived is because the desert here doesn't get much rain. So really, the Nazca weren't just artists, they were lucky collaborators with geology. And yet, despite the fragility, these lines have lasted for centuries. Think of all the civilizations that have risen and fallen, leaving behind broken temples, decayed scrolls, shattered statues. But here, a monkey with a spiral tail still lounges across the desert floor, perfectly recognizable. Time plays favorites, apparently. A whimsical thought hits you. What if future humans tried to read our messages to the sky? Satellite photos of giant sports stadiums, highways carved across continents, maybe even crop circles of suburbia. They'd probably assume we were worshipping strange gods named Target and Costco. Historians still argue whether the Nazca actually intended their work to be seen from above. After all, no airplanes, no satellites, just mountaintops and imagination. Was the true audience the gods, not humans? Or did the Nazca simply enjoy the act of creation itself, regardless of whether anyone else saw it? It's like doodling in the margins of a notebook. You don't always need an audience to make meaning. The sky grows darker, a rich velvet spread with glitter. The Southern Cross tilts above you, and suddenly the desert feels like the midpoint of a cosmic scale. Below you, lines carved by human hands. Above you, lines of light carved by nuclear fusion. Between them, just you, breathing, listening, wondering. And maybe that's the whole point. The Nazca lines aren't only about their meaning back then. They're about what they spark in you now. Curiosity, wonder, a tingle of mystery that no Wi-Fi signal can replicate. You stop walking, let the silence fold over you, and glance one last time at the desert stretched out like parchment. Somewhere in the dark, a hummingbird waits for the stars to notice. The desert night is wide awake now, wrapped in a dark blanket, scattered with countless stars. The lines at your feet fade into shadow, almost invisible. But you know they're still there, retched like secret whispers into the earth. You breathe in the cool air. And for a moment, it feels like you're standing between two realms. One above, one below, both infinite in their own ways. Here's the grounding fact. Archaeologists agree that the Nazca culture thrived between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They weren't just line makers. They built underground aqueducts called puqueos to survive in this unforgiving desert. Those systems still carry water today. Proof that the Nazca weren't just spiritual dreamers, but engineers who understood how to bend nature, at least a little, to their will. But then comes the quirky tidbit. Some fringe researchers have suggested that the puqueos and the lines are connected, that maybe the geoglyphs were part of a massive hydrological map or ritual system tied to water. Imagine a civilization in one of the driest places on Earth, carving mile-long patterns, not just for gods, but as part of a desperate, practical, magical attempt to summon rain. It's like praying and plumbing all rolled into one. Historians still argue whether the Nazca intended these works purely as spiritual gestures, or if they had earthly utility woven in. Were they farmers desperately appealing to sky deities for a good harvest? Or were they brilliant pragmatists who disguised their irrigation and survival strategies in the language of myth and ritual? The truth may be a blurry mix of both. You look around and realize the irony. You've been wandering here with the luxury of modern survival tools, GP, bottled water, a warm jacket, but the people who lived here had none of that. They carved enormous animals into the desert, kept the faith that invisible beings might notice, and somehow endured in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And you complain when your Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes? Still, that human impulse to leave? Something bigger than yourself behind, that's timeless. The Nazca Lines may never be fully explained, but that doesn't erase their value. In fact, the mystery is what keeps them alive in our imagination. If archaeologists solved it tomorrow with a neat PowerPoint slide, the spell might shatter. It's the not knowing that keeps you awake in the desert night. Craning your neck at the stars, you smirk at the thought. If aliens did drop by, they'd probably be amused by how obsessed humans are with being noticed. Maybe they'd say, "Cute hummingbird." But you know we've got entire galaxies shaped like dragons, right? And yet, you can't shake the feeling that even if no god or alien ever looked down, the act of making those lines mattered deeply to the Nazca. Sometimes creation is enough. A sudden chill pushes through the silence, and you zip your jacket. The desert is never really quiet. There's the hiss of sand shifting, the occasional nocturnal insect, and your own breath. You stand at the edge of a trapezoid, and it feels like a runway into the void. Maybe that's what the Nazca wanted too. Give humanity a runway to imagine bigger, wilder, stranger things, and here you are, centuries later, still walking that path. And now, the desert softens. The night stretches longer, the stars blur at the edges, and the lines themselves fade into dream stuff. You let your body sink into the thought of warm sand beneath you, cool air above, as if you're floating in a space where earth and sky have no boundary at all. Your breathing slows. The questions you carried about gods, about aliens, about survival dissolves into something quieter. It doesn't matter whether the Nazca drew messages for the heavens or for themselves. What matters is the feeling, the hush, the awe, the patience it takes to carve something into the earth that you may never fully understand. Let your shoulders drop. Let the hum of the fan in your room echo the desert's breeze. The mystery is safe now, tucked away in lines no storm has yet erased. And you too can rest knowing that not every puzzle needs solving tonight. You close your eyes. The monkey with its spiral tail curls in the sand. The hummingbird hovers, eternal in its flight. Above them, stars turn slowly, quietly, just as they did for the Nazca, just as they will long after. Drift with them now. Let your thoughts glide into the stillness, into the spaces between stars, into the soft silence where questions no longer matter. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.